Welcome to Technovation. I'm Peter High. My guest today is Dave Williams. Dave is Merck's Chief Information and Digital Officer. Merck is a multinational pharmaceutical company with roughly $48 billion in annual revenue. Under Dave's direction, the technology organization is focused on helping Merck's research, manufacturing, and business units develop and leverage digital solutions to serve customers and achieve business value. Dave has held numerous roles over his 18 years with the company, most recently, prior to this one, as Chief Information Officer of Merck Animal Health. Dave, welcome to Technovation. Great to speak with you today.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Excellent. Well, I thought we would begin with your current role. As I mentioned a moment ago, you are the Chief Information and Digital Officer. Talk a little bit about the Purview and perhaps a little bit about the two sides of that role.
Sure. Thank you. We have a team of about 3,300 talented IT professionals that support our end-to-end global business, from early discovery in the labs to clinical development, manufacturing, supply chain, sales and marketing, as well as all of our corporate functions. We have divisional CIOs that face off to each of those business units I mentioned, and then we have a set of shared capabilities for infrastructure, security, enterprise application analytics, et cetera. We have a four-hub model globally. So we have hubs in Singapore, Prague, Branchford, New Jersey, and Austin, Texas. And yeah, it's interesting. I always get asked the question, what's the difference between the CIO role and the CDO role? And, I always say I've never really felt a difference. You'll ask some people and they'll say, well, the CIOs are focused on kind of the IT infrastructure, and the CDOs are focused on driving digital and transformation. And for me, I've always looked at the two together and had the opportunity to do both roles in animal health. So, I guess I would say, the CDO is a little bit more about actually driving business transformation and change and making sure that you're applying that technology to drive real value. So yeah, those are the two sides of the role.
That's really interesting. You talked about how significant the operations are. These are massive businesses underneath the corporate umbrella. And talk a bit further, if you would, about how it's governed. So you have been a business unit Chief Information Officer and Chief Digital Officer before ascending to the global role. How do you now work with your old peers? How are things governed? What is managed at the center versus those things that are federated and autonomous within the purview of those leaders?
Yeah. So honestly, it's certainly not the easiest thing, and it's continually evolving. And I always share with my team in the organization that at the highest level, Peter, I think there's three things that we really need to focus on. The first is we absolutely need to have great relationships with our business partners. We need to understand their businesses, their domains, and really act as those trusted advisors. If you don't have the relationship, the credibility, the trust, everything else is much more difficult. So it always starts with those relationships. Second, and related to that, is we need to make sure that we're focused on the top priorities that are going to drive the most value for our business and our patients. And we need to be absolutely obsessed with realizing value from those top priorities. I often tell my team, as technologists, we get very excited when we launch something. Right, a new platform, a new product, a new technology, and we should. That's certainly a point in time to celebrate. But it's also the point in time where you spent all the investment and have zero return. If you think about it, right? It's equivalent to, in our business, we get approval for a new pharmaceutical product. That's great, but we have no sales yet. We've spent everything in the R&D and we haven't generated a return yet. So I often tell my team that that's actually the starting line. And what you do after you launch a new capability is so important, because that's when you actually realize the value. So we have to make sure we're focused on those priorities and realizing value. And then the last thing is you have to be agile, because the world doesn't stand still. Things change rapidly. We've certainly learned that in the last 15 months or so. Technology changes very quickly. Competition changes quickly. So you need the relationships, you need to focus on the priorities, and you need to make sure that you're agile and you adjust when you need to. That's kind of how I think of governance at the highest level.
I really like that. And your mention of the need to think beyond just the launch, to think about, managing after launch, so to say, brings to mind a priority that I know that you've had, which is changing IT's orientation from a project to a product orientation. And I have to imagine that those are two sides of the same coin. That in fact the product orientation is in many ways optimizing, helping IT develop that mentality, such that once you've launched something, in so many ways, as you put it, it's the beginning. It's at that point that the further refinement, the additional innovation around that, turning things on or off based upon their efficacy, et cetera. Talk a bit about that journey from project to product, if you would.
Sure. Yeah, maybe I'll start with describing what I think of as more of a legacy model now. The project-based model where you think about traditionally how IT has worked. You gather requirements, which is, by the way, one of my I hate when my team asks that question. What are your requirements? Because it's more of an order taker mindset. But in any event, you start with, okay, what are your requirements? You design a solution, you build it, you test it, it gets ultimately deployed, and then you go into support mode. And then you repeat that for business needs as they come up. And what ends up ultimately happening to these projects is they become legacy in our business, either because they're just older or they no longer meet the needs of the business and they've moved on. And I think this model that we've all been following for so many years is actually a big reason we have such challenges in corporate America now as it relates to technical debt and securing some of this older infrastructure, and honestly having some of our business partners who are frustrated with the solutions from a user experience standpoint or capabilities. So in a product model, you actually act much more like a software hardware business who's developing and continually enhancing product offerings, right? You want to be focused on, I want to build a product that's going to go out into the market. I want to gain market share. I want to have thrilled customers, and I want to always be so closely connected to them that we've got enhancements that are continually meeting their needs and adding more and more value over time. And so it's a very different mindset. It just naturally lends itself to be closer to your customers and your business partners internally. And the way you do that is also important. And this is a big change because you want to build, product teams where you eliminate the silos and you just take all the different roles that need to be put together to deliver that product into one, group, and not necessarily from an org chart standpoint, but logically or from a matrix. And you empower them. Right? You empower them to meet the needs of that business, to own their roadmaps, to own their investment. And, in the areas where we are working this way, our employee engagement is the highest. It's a much more fun way to work than kind of that traditional waterfall. Now, we have a long way to go in this, I think, as many corporations do. Some of this is still on PowerPoint slides, as I like to say, and we have to make it real. But just to highlight maybe, Peter, one example that's related to the pandemic is, we had a capability in the augmented reality space that we started developing probably 3 or 4 years ago. And it's based on HoloLens, and it allows us to virtually put people in the manufacturing shop floor or in the labs, wherever they are geographically. And we had, I would say, decent adoption up until last March. But then once the pandemic hit, and people that typically would travel to a manufacturing site to help with an inspection or help with a build out of capital equipment were no longer able to be there, they needed to be there still, right, to keep business running. And so the adoption of this platform, which we call Remote Assist, took off exponentially. I mean, we probably have 10 times the amount of infrastructure out there now than we had 15 months ago. And our business partners love it. And I think one of the key success criteria there is it's a product team, right? There's a team that's self-contained. They handle everything from the infrastructure to the user experience to the augmented reality capability. And it's been a real success story.
That's a great one. I appreciate you sharing that. I know another area of focus is an accelerating the move to the cloud. Something that you see as paramount in developing the sort of agility you described at writ large. Talk a bit about your vision there and the extent to which, if it did, the extent to which the events of the past year have hastened its acceleration.
Yeah. I mean, I think every corporation has a cloud initiative, right? It wouldn't be an IT department if you didn't. And in ours, it's interesting. When I came into this role 15 months ago, I would have said, I think we're pretty progressive in terms of how we adopt cloud. But it was one of those areas that I actually, committed myself to dive deeper into and learn more. And the more I learned, the more I realized that it's more than an opportunity to simply move infrastructure and applications to a more flexible, scalable environment. It's actually an opportunity to totally transform your entire operation. So I don't look at our journey to cloud as really a cost cutting initiative. I look at it as something that's going to significantly improve our speed, agility, enable us to light up new capabilities much, much more quickly than we used to be able to. But honestly, Peter, I think a big opportunity we have to innovate in this space is how we execute on the journey. And again, everybody has a cloud initiative, but people have had mixed success with it. It's a big cultural shift. You need to win the hearts and minds of the IT organization to get there, I think is a big part. It's about driving business change in addition to technology change. Yeah, I could share another example. One thing we launched last summer, I think it was August, September, was, and we recognize the need to build up our internal competencies as it relates to cloud. And so we launched this program just to get it jump started called 100 in 100. And the goal was we want to have 100 new Amazon Web Services or AWS certifications in 100 days. And we partnered with the AWS team, and I'll tell you, the results were phenomenal. We got to 100 days. I think we ended up having 400 people certified. We're probably up to 600 now. But the biggest change was the energy it created in the organization. And I can't tell you how many people came up to me and said, I never knew you could do this. And what I look at as some of the key value drivers here is, my head of architecture says, if it's not automated, it's not cloud. So you need to think of this in terms of everything needs to be automated. And compared to the way we used to deploy technology, right? And I'll date myself here, but long procurement cycles, people physically installing stuff, manually configuring things. And if you do cloud right, it truly can be 100% automated, which allows you to focus on much higher value activities like the value realization things that I mentioned before. So this is one, the more time I spend here, the more excited I get about it, because it really can touch every part of our business.
Yeah, very interesting, and certainly emblematic of where business is going as well. You also have been, and you've touched a little bit on this, but accelerating the pathway towards advanced analytics as a pathway to make better decisions. Talk a bit about how you've done that and some of the building blocks to get there.
Yeah, and again, like I think most corporations, data analytics, AI, ML is a huge opportunity. And I say we have pockets of excellence, I'll call it, across Merck. But our big opportunity is how do we do it more broadly and how do we do it at scale with increasing velocity? And if I think of the opportunities of where this can help us, just in our own function, first off, is you think about what's a good example? I guess cyber. We are challenged to understand, well, where is our risk and how do we make sure that we're investing in the appropriate way to mitigate as much of that as we can. And we do a good job of that, but it's manual. And you look at some of the technologies that are coming out today that allow you to do AI-based risk assessment and scoring and help you, focus resources where you're going to get the greatest return. In our own shop, just automation, leveraging AI as a key lever, to automate things. And some are basic, like help desk. I was just meeting with a startup earlier this week that has a really cool conversational AI approach to significantly reducing the amount of calls that have to go to a human being. So that results in reduced cost. It helps with user satisfaction and experience. It's self-learning, right? So it helps you improve across your end-to-end business. If I think of our research organization, accelerating drug discovery through things like image analysis and better prediction of which molecules may show activity against a disease target. A lot of these things are still heavily experimental based, and being able to take big data and algorithms and help assist our scientists to do that work more quickly is a huge value driver in helping get new medicines to market. On the manufacturing front, I wish I could just snap my fingers and have an entirely digitized shop floor where every piece of information from where it's collected on our manufacturing process was in a place where it was easily consumable with the appropriate algorithms and visualization tools. That would help us improve yields, reduce waste, and ultimately provide product at a lower cost to our market and our customers. In the commercial space, a ton of opportunities to improve forecasting and identify next best action for engagement. And then I guess I'll leave off where I spent 8 years in animal health, because we're doing some really cool things around advanced analytics there. Where we're the leader on leveraging AI on the farm for our customers. I guess to appreciate this, if you haven't spent time on a farm, when you go on a farm, whether it's a dairy farm or a beef feedlot, a swine farm, poultry farm, a lot of the practice today is still manual observation to identify health and assess health and wellness issues. And what we've been able to do is take sensors and algorithms and mobile technology and say to our customers, we'll tell you when that dairy cow is in heat. We'll tell you when that beef cattle is demonstrating symptoms of bovine respiratory disease. And we'll actually be able to do it with a pretty good rate of accuracy. So you think of the benefits that has for that customer base around improving health and wellness, first off, of livestock, reducing labor, improving productivity for the farmers, quality of life. When I've been out in the field a lot, and that's probably the number one thing that our customers told us is, you've actually enabled me to spend more time with my family and doing things because I don't have to physically be looking or have somebody looking at my farms every day. So I can go on and on, Peter, about some of the excitement we have in the analytics space, but I think I'll end up with how you do this is so important. And the formula for me is you have to have great tech that's cloud-based, flexible, agile. You have to identify, what are the priority areas you're going to go after, because there's so many opportunities. If you try and do everything at once, you'll fail. And then you have to have an operating model where, the technologists and the business folks work and just meld together. So lots of opportunities, great tech to enable these, and you need to have a way of working that allows you to realize the value from it.
In a past conversation you and I've had, you've talked about the fear you have, or maybe not fear is probably too strong a word, but you think that you mentioned that you believe that IT departments at times can be focused specifically on the tactics, on smaller items, as opposed to really kind of contemplating the big rocks, the bigger initiatives that the organization can focus on to add the highest levels of value for the company and for the company's end customers. Talk a bit about how you think about orienting the IT organization towards that. You've talked about great relationships with business partners. You talked about the need to focus on the top priorities of customers. Talk a bit about some of the methods behind it. And we would love to hear, you've already mentioned several examples of innovations. If there are any others that you would cite as some of these bigger bets, I would be interested in hearing those as well.
Yeah, thanks. It goes back to, I think, your first or second question around, how do we manage, these massive business units? And so it really does start with the relationships and aligning on, okay, where are the opportunities for us to drive value? Because if you don't have that, you're just guessing. But if you have that, you can anchor everything you do towards those outcomes. And I don't know if it's a worry, but I guess it's a quality problem to have. Is it's a target-rich environment out there in terms of the opportunities we can pursue as a business. You combine that with the rapid pace of technology, plus diverse and sometimes conflicting priorities if we don't do the first thing I mentioned, right? And so you add all that up together, and it's a high risk for quickly losing focus or falling into a tech for tech's sake mindset, where I'm just not quite sure what the priorities are, but there's a lot of cool tech out there, so I'll just focus on building things and hope that there's an application for those at some point. And I clearly don't think that that's the right model. So it's important to have the organization aligned on a common strategy, aligned on those high value use cases. And as I mentioned again before, the operating model that allows us to bring all this together. And with the continued advancements in cloud computing, the playing field's been really leveled. relative to access to the latest tech. So our differentiator is not going to be, Merck can afford to invest in technologies that others can't. I mean, everybody can get access to these capabilities. So the differentiator is, again, I don't want to sound redundant, but it's selecting the right priorities, aligning the organization, and having an efficient operating model to deliver, and then applying the greatest technology to pull through that value. And in terms of what are some of the bigger areas I see, and we've touched on a lot of them with automation and AI and cloud, and so all those certainly excite me. And there's new platforms and solutions and startups popping up every day. As I mentioned, I had the opportunity with 3 or 4 startups just this week, and as I'm listening to their tech, there's 2 sides of the coin in my brain. It's like, wow, that's really cool tech that's going to enable us to do so much. The other side is, how do I integrate that and drive value in Merck, which can be, sometimes a complex environment. So, I think another area from a tech standpoint is there's a category of new technology and startups that are really focused on solving the data-rich, information-poor problem, right? Where we all have data, it's all over the place. We've gone from data warehouses to data lakes or swamps. Now the latest terminology is lakefronts, which is trying to combine the best of all these different worlds. And so I think as we continue to innovate in that space, which is a combination of technology, process, leveraging the cloud, being able to connect different capabilities is really going to be a big opportunity for us. And again, I'll anchor back to, if you've got the right relationships with your business, because this is a tough journey when you're trying to drive this change, I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah. This has been such an interesting year for all of us, but all the more in your industry. And I'm curious if there are learnings, even silver linings about new ways of working across the past, 13, 14 months that you believe have long tails to them, even once we reach some sort of new or next normal. What are some of your reflections there, Dave?
Yeah, gosh, lots of learnings. I think one is, as I look at it, it's really important to understand that there isn't a single playbook, a pandemic playbook. And as I talk to different people on my team in different geographies, everybody is in unique situations. For example, we had a subset of our population that worked from home fairly frequently before the pandemic, and for them, going to this virtual world was not that big of a transition because they had space in their home, they were comfortable with the tech. Then you had others who maybe had never worked from home, and suddenly, literally overnight, you're put in place where you've got to try and do your job remotely. The technology can be intimidating, you might be uncomfortable with it. So one learning is, you have to really double down on user experience, and you have to, almost have white glove service for your population to ensure that people can remain productive. The other is that, in terms of things that'll stick, well, the capability I mentioned before around remote assist, that's something that now is here to stay. And people that used to think, well, I have to get on that plane to go visit that manufacturing site to assist with, this capability. Well, now I just learned that I can do that in a very different way. So I think there's a lot we've learned in terms of things we thought we had to be in person to accomplish. There's a lot of these we can do remotely. And that includes engaging with customers. We've been fortunate that most of our capabilities that are used to engage with customers are cloud-based. So it was not that big of a transition from a technology standpoint. And what we've seen is some of our metrics of engagement are actually up. So we've actually been able to get closer to our customers in some pockets during this period. So I'm hopeful that some of those learnings are things that will stick, and we won't revert back to that. But I think the pendulum sometimes can go a little bit too far, and it'll be interesting to see as we settle back into work for Merck, what will be a hybrid way of working. How do we keep the best things that we learned, and not just revert back, and then continue to learn as we go, because I feel like we still have a long way to go in terms of learning.
Just wanted to ask you at the conclusion here, Dave, what trends excite you as you look to the future? We've talked about a number that you were investing in, the orientation from a project to a product operating model, the investments in the cloud and data analytics, the lakefronts that you're establishing, et cetera. If there's anything that you've missed or anything you'd like to reemphasize, I would be interested as you look, say, 2 or 3 years out. What are some of the things that particularly fascinate you?
Yeah, I have to say the one that fascinates me and scares me at the same time is quantum computing. Scares me because it's so hard to understand, and I'll admit that. But when you look at um, you know the potential for that, in terms of drug, really, really complex, challenging issues like weather prediction and human biology, and accelerating drug discovery and development, security, encryption. If and when quantum becomes reality, and I still think we're 5 to 10 years out before some of these use cases start to become mainstream, but that's going to be one to watch and one to really keep an eye on. It's just fascinating. I'm so impressed with some of these startups and the vision that they have. And there's a lot of venture capital money being put into this space rather. So that's one that we're going to keep an eye on, play around with, experiment a little bit. And then, of course, we're going to really double and triple down on some of the other capabilities that I've mentioned throughout our conversation here.
Excellent. Well, Dave Williams, thank you so much for joining me on Technovation today. It's been great to hear a bit about your strategy, your purview, your vision for the future, the innovations that you're enabling on behalf of the company and your company's customers. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me, Peter.